In this tutorial, we'll be using the 3D Render Addon by KIRI Engine to edit, paint, and merge several 3D scans into a single object, ready for exporting to third-party 3D software and viewers. First, let's look at the models we're going to use for this tutorial. We have this awesome in-game Final Fantasy scan, has a really cool sword that I'd like to use, and this was scanned using the KIRI Engine app. And I actually downloaded this from the KIRI Engine app homepage. This cute lizard dragon guy was also downloaded from the KIRI app homepage and scanned using KIRI Engine. This skull 3D model and this, I think, Warhammer miniature both actually started as meshes, as we can see here, and they were converted to 3D scans using the add-ons Mesh to 3D conversion, which we cover in our other quick guides and the extensive tutorial playlists. Since I only want to keep the sword from this scan, and I want to remove the base from this scan, we'll start with some quick bulk editing techniques within the add-on. To do that, we'll start by importing and editing these scans as point clouds, and later move to editing them as mesh faces. I'll start by cleaning up the reptile scan. So I'm going to go to point cloud, import PLY as points. I'll have a warning not to use Blender's native apply scale or rotation. Press OK, and I'll import my little reptile head. And with it imported as a point cloud, there are almost no performance considerations, and I can work extremely fast. I'll add the point edit modifier with this plus icon, and now in material or rendered mode, I can see the point colors. I'm going to rotate this scan into a position I like more and align it with the world origin just to make working a little easier. I want to remove these points here, the stand on the mesh. I'm going to shrink the point scale a little so I can see exactly what I'm looking at. And I could use the modifiers within the add-on, but with something this simple, I'm just going to go to edit mode, make sure I'm looking all the way through the mesh itself with Shift Z. I can see here that we have X-ray on. Select these points, press X to delete vertices. Since I'm removing points, I make sure I'm in Vertex select mode. If I was in face select mode, I wouldn't be able to select anything. I can also see that inside the head, there are a number of points that are completely useless to me. And at the same time, I want to remove this base. So I could actually, from the add-on, go to modifiers and add a wire cube. A wire cube is convenient because it won't render, but we can use it as a Boolean or crop box object. I'm going to shrink this down so that it's inside the head, scale it, move it down so that it's grabbing some of these points that I don't want right here. Then selecting the head, enable crop box, select the wire cube, and turn the crop mode to inside crop box. Now anything inside of this cube is being removed, so I can apply the modifier with this apply on the active point cloud menu. I can re-add the point edit modifier, and if I wanted, I could keep moving this cube and using it as a crop box object within the crop box modifier. But I'm just going to stick to some manual edits for now. So going to edit mode, select these points and delete them. And I think that is fine for what we need. So I'll delete my wire cube for now, and I'm going to put this mesh into a folder called edited, and I'll disable edited for now and come back to it later when we re-export. Now we want to isolate and remove this sword from the cloud scan. So back in the add-on, from the point cloud menu, I'll import PLY as points, OK, and select my PLY file. Here we can really see the advantage of working with points. This is a huge scan with around 750,000 points, and I can remove them very quickly using the modifiers in the modifiers tab. I'll add the point edit modifier the plus, and I can remove the background sphere elements by clicking Enable Auto Crop BG Sphere. If the points aren't removed, I'll play with this sphere threshold. And I can see that they've been removed. Now the points are a little bit fat, so it's hard to see what's happening. So in the Active Point Cloud menu, I'll lower the point scale. There's my sword and cloud right there. I'm going to rotate the scan so it fits Blender's axes better. RX90 minus, and move it into the center a little more. And I'll again add a wire cube, and selecting my points, enable crop box, select the wire cube, select the wire cube, outside crop box will be removed, and now I can scale and move the cube to get only the points I want. Since the wire cube is actually a mesh, I can actually edit the points of this cube to assist in my cropping. Now it looks like we've got mostly just the sword, and we do have some hands here that we can clean up in face edit mode, since it'll be easier to see what's going on. I'm going to select my point object again, and I'm going to apply the modifier, and maybe I can remove some of these stray points quickly with some manual editing. Go into edit mode and quickly select some of these points that I can tell don't contribute to the outline, the silhouette of the sword itself. If I hold Control and right mouse button, I can do a lasso select of any points, and I can press X and delete vertices. Now that we have pretty much just the sword, I'm going to move it into the center and rotate it so it has a nicer orientation, and that should do nicely. I'm going to move this into my edited folder, and now let's check out our edited points. We have our reptile head and we have our sword, but there are two completely different scales. And we actually want their scales to be relative to the body mesh that we're going to be using. So let's bring in our body and our skull. Since the skull and the body are already fairly clean scans, I'm going to move now into editing as faces using the 3D-GS workflow from the active menu. I'll go to import PLY as splats. I again get the warning not to apply rotation or scale using Blender's native apply scale and rotation. I'm not doing any kind of advanced shader editing, so I'm going to leave UV reset unchecked and hit OK. Okay, the miniature model has imported, but it looks like it's invisible in the viewport. That's because right now all the faces are perfectly perpendicular with my view. I look around a little, I can see there it is. And right now, I only care about the scale of this object, so I'm going to go to the Active Object menu and show this as a point cloud, and then shrink the point scale a little. And viewing this as a point cloud should improve performance until we need to view it as faces. I'll hide this model and now import the skull. From 3D-GS, import PLY as splats. Okay, find the skull, import, and now wait a minute. Again, it's hard to see, but if I rotate around, there it is. And I'll also show this as a point cloud and shrink the scale a little. Now I'll unhide my body, and I can see that the skull is massive compared to the body. And if I unhide my edited scans, I can see that the scales are all over the place. There may be scale and scale dimension inconsistencies between softwares, but I'm going to use my standard scaling method for working with meshes in Blender. I'm going to assume that this guy is around 2 meters tall, and I'm going to add a cube, which should be 2 meters tall, and I'll place it on the ground with GZ1, and this should be from the ground 2 meters high. Then I can move my body, and I can see that he's a pretty good height actually already. So I'm going to leave him at this scale, and I'm going to scale everything else relative to the body. So I'll first grab the sword, scale it up to match his mace, and I think that's a good size for the sword. Maybe it could be a bit bigger, but I don't want it looking too ridiculous like it does on Cloud, so I'm going to leave it like this. Then for the head, bring that down, scale it down, and the head could be a little oversized maybe if this is some sort of alien creature, but I think that's a good size. And then the skulls, roughly estimate around this size should do it. And we don't need to be perfect right now because we will be re-importing these as faces, and we can adjust scale later also. But this is a good base plan to work from. Now we don't need to keep these points on top of each other. I'm going to re-export them as edited PLY files and then re-import them as faces, which makes them easier to see, easier to edit, easier to combine. As we've noticed multiple times on the import dialog, we're told not to apply rotation or scales using Blender's native apply scale and rotation, which we can see if we select an object and hit Ctrl A. We can see apply, location, rotation, scale, all transforms, or rotation scale. Using these would not update the 3D.js data and would leave these objects now unexportable. But with the add-on enabled, we've added a new button, Apply 3D.js Transforms and Color, to the Apply menu. We can use this to make sure that these objects are exported correctly. Thankfully though, the export menu from both 3D.js and point cloud menus will take care of applying these transforms for you. So you can apply the transforms while working, which we'll do later when we want to merge scans, or if you're exporting a single 3D.js object, you can let the export button take care of that for you. The world origin will be treated as the origin of your object when exporting. So don't forget that my body actually is composed of faces. We're just showing as a point cloud right now. So we can get this out of the way over here. And our skull also is composed of faces. So I'm going to move this guy over here. But our head and our sword are still point cloud objects. So I'm going to export them and re-import them with their new scales and rotations applied. I'll do that by facing my head forward a little, keeping the scale that we have set relative to the body. That looks good. The origin will be the world origin, which is good for this head right now. And I'll go to the export menu. Reset origin would send this object back to the middle of our world. I've already lined it up, so I'm going to uncheck that, press export points for 3D.js. Now I'm going to add the suffix edited points, so I know which object this is. Selection only, yes, export PLY. And I don't need this point cloud anymore, so I can delete it. X, delete, go to 3D.js, import PLY as splats. Okay, find my edited points, PLY, import, wait a minute, and I can see here's my model as faces with the rotation, the scale, and our edited points included in the new PLY. I'm going to move this guy over here, over to the side, and now do the same export for my sword, but first making its rotation a bit more editing friendly and making sure it's at the center of the world, but keeping the scale that I set earlier. Go to point cloud, reset origin, don't need it, I've done it myself. Export points for 3D.js, selection only, export PLY. I can now delete this and re-import from 3D.js, import, and here's my new imported object as faces. And I'll move this to one side. Now that we have all of our components and their base scale is nice and their base rotation is quite nice, I want to start editing. I'm going to bring my body mesh into the center of the scene here, and I can see that it's actually lagging. Performance isn't too great, and if I look, that's because this single mesh is 300,000 faces, and in total in our scene we have 750,000 faces, and a number of modifiers that we would usually be using to render are also taking up some processing power. So what we can do is we can set up our scene just for editing, since we don't care about rendering today. and then we can apply some of those modifiers. So with my body mesh selected, I have camera updates enabled. This allows me to change the orientation of the faces, either by adjusting them to an active camera view or using the scene controls, or by clicking Update Active to View. I'm going to go into a comfortable working position by looking forward. Make sure I'm not in orthographic view. I'm going to update these faces, and then I'm going to go to Apply Modifiers, and I'm going to apply the 3DGS Render modifier by checking it and hitting OK. These faces can no longer be updated to view. That doesn't matter since we only care about editing these faces. I'm going to hide my body a moment, and I'm not going to apply modifiers for the sword since it's pretty light anyway. If I check the skull, this one is 300,000 faces also, since it was converted directly from a mesh. So I'm going to go to front view, make sure I'm not in orthographic view, update the faces once, and actually first I'm going to make the rotation of this object a little more comfortable. Then I'm going to update the faces, make sure I'm not in orthographic view, update, apply modifiers, and apply the 3DGS render modifier. Unhide the body, we have the skull, the sword, and the reptile on too dense. So we're keeping the 3DGS modifiers on these guys, and that should make working much easier. I'm going to bring my base mesh into the center of the scene, and I'm going to move the head into a position that looks good. Okay, that seems pretty fun, but we can see there's a lot of intersecting faces that we don't need anymore. So I'm first going to look at the body, going to enter with the tab key or from up here, and then I can begin to start selecting faces in face select mode. And if I go to wireframe with Shift Z, I can select all the way through the model by selecting the back here. So I'll hold Control and deselect those points at the back, and let's press delete, and we've cleared some of the head. If I press Shift Z for wireframe mode, I can press the C key and use my scroll wheel to bring up the circle select and then paint a selection. Looking at the top, make sure I'm not selecting these points at the back, and let's try deleting these faces. And I think that's okay for now. You could spend more time making this much cleaner. Let's do the same for the head, removing the points below the collar here. In edit mode, wireframe, I'm going to hold Control, right click, and use the lasso tool to select these points. Check them in material preview mode and delete. Do the same again. Press C and paint a selection through the collar, and pressing the / to isolate this object. I'll look from the side, Control right button to lasso select, and delete those faces. Exit edit mode. And that's looking pretty fun. We'll try and work on adjusting the color a bit so that it matches better later. Now we want to add our sword to the body mesh. So let's first select the body mesh. I'm going to solo the body mesh with /, going to edit mode, wireframe with Shift Z, Control and right mouse button select. Select these faces and then delete. And the base of the mace is actually pretty cool and means we don't have to deal so much with removing these hands here. So I might just keep this, and now going to the sword, soloing it with /, edit mode, and select these bottom faces and delete. And let's reposition and rotate so that our sword kind of fits on the hand here. And this is where editing in face mode is advantageous, as I can see these stray points are really easy to identify and select. And now moving on to the skull. So we don't really need the back half of the skull. So I'll solo the skull, and in edit mode and Shift Z wireframe, I'm going to delete the back half of the skull. Maybe this much is good. Delete faces. And I can start to move this around into position. It's protruding a little too much, so I'm going to scale it on the Y, but I can see that scaling on the Y isn't quite working the way I would expect it to. And now we can talk about applying transforms. To get predictable scaling when working with meshes, we would usually Control A, apply, rotation, and scale. Because this is a 3DGS mesh object that later we want to merge, and then in re-export, we need to use the KIRI Apply 3D transforms. Let's look at the item panel for this object. We can see that there's rotation and scale that has been unapplied. I'm going to hit Ctrl and apply 3D transforms and color. Wait a moment. And I can now see that the rotation is 0 and the scale is 1, and internally the 3D attributes have been updated. Now if I scale on the Y or the X, we get much more predictable scaling. So I'm going to flatten my skull on the Y a little, scale it, move it into position. Of course, I suggest you spend much more time. The sword doesn't look too bad with the beige and yellow tones of the body, but this green really isn't working with the rest of the body. So we want to paint our reptile head. So I'm going to forward shift to isolate the reptile head. And while I'm painting, it would be nice if these faces were constantly updating. So I'm going to add a camera, look through my camera, move it so it's easier to see the head, select the head, and because the head still has the 3D render modifier remaining, we didn't apply it, we can press Use Active Camera, and then we can lock our view to the camera with this padlock. And now when we move around our scene, the faces for this object will constantly update. Now looking at our head with our body, I want to sample some colors from the body to paint the head. Selecting the head, I go to the color menu, scroll down till I find Vertex Paint and enable Vertex Painting. I can then press Start Painting. Now I can select the color by right-clicking or going to the top bar here. I'll select the color swatch and select the eyedropper and select a color from the body. If I start to paint, I'll now see that the head is taking on these colors. Let's look at the head alone with / on the numpad. Looking through the camera is locked to view, and I can start to paint the head. Right now, we can see that the blend mode is set to color, which is quite good for painting, and the mix factor is controlling the strength of our color edits. I'm going to give it a wash all over of the color that we sampled from the body. And I'm going to exit the solo view with / and it's looking a bit more integrated. Let's play with the mix factor to see what changed, but I don't like how I've painted over the eyes. So I'm actually going to press Reset Paint to start with the original painting again. Now soloing the head, looking for the camera view, I'm going to try and paint everything except the eyes and the horns. I can change the size of the brush by pressing F. And we're actually using Blender's native Vertex Paint features. So you can always change your brush types here or change your blend mode while painting here, as well as the brush strength here. Looking back at the two figures together, I think we need a bit more color variation. I can experiment with the blend modes. I usually find color is the best way to adjust things, but I can also adjust the basic color edits at the top here, like the brightness and the contrast, and hue and saturation, till you find something that matches the body a little better. And we can see with painting on and with painting off. And I'm not very good at painting, but I would say that's an improvement. Now let's exit Vertex Paint mode, back to object mode. I can select my sword and again go to color, Vertex Paint, enable Vertex Painting, start painting, sample a color from the body. Maybe I'll sample the green this time. Start painting. And right now my blend mode is only affecting the color, which is a little strange in this case. If I change this to hue and turn the strength up a little bit, I'd say it fits better. Let's check. Enable Vertex Painting, toggle it on and off. And it's very subtle, but I like it. And I'm going to exit Vertex Paint, go back to object mode. If we check the HQ LQ menu, we're still using LQ mode for our materials. Let's check with HQ mode enabled. And our head's gone. That's because we have multiple objects that are intersecting each other. If I click Objects Overlap and Generate HQ Object and OK, we can see what everything looks like when it's merged together. Our original objects have been put into this LQ Objects folder, and we're currently looking at a proxy merged object called HQ Merged Object. Since I'm only editing and not rendering inside of Blender, this is just for previewing. I'm going to actually go back to LQ mode, untoggle objects overlap. I'll get a prompt that I can delete the HQ object if I want. I'll press OK. Now all our objects are still separated. We want to be able to join them together, but to do that, we need to apply the 3D transforms for each object. If we check in the items panel here, we can see that the sword has a rotation X 27, the head has a rotation 0, the skull has a rotation 4. So if we joined all these objects together as they are, this would totally mess up the 3D rotation and scale values. So I'm going to select each object, use Ctrl A, and select Apply 3D Transforms and Color. If I look at the rotation here, it's now 0 and the scale is 1, and I know that the 3D values have been applied for the body. I'll hide it since I know it's done. I'll do the same for the head, Ctrl A, Apply 3D Transforms and Color. Rotation and scale are 0 and 1. Hide the head, do the same for the skull, 0 and 1. Do the same for the sword, 0 and 1. And now unhide everything. Now that we've applied 3D Transforms and Color, the 3D Render modifier and the color modifiers have also been applied for each of these objects. I can select the head and Shift select the body, Ctrl J, and these are now a single object. Select the sword, select the head and body merged, Ctrl J, and now this is a single object, and do the same for the skull and the body. And with the skull joined, we have a single object composed of all of our edits and all of our paintwork as well. This object no longer has the 3D render modifier, so trying to render or view this object in Blender will fail if we reach certain angles and if we try and update the faces. But we can now export this object for rendering in a third-party viewer, or we could re-import the exported PLY into Blender for rendering. Let's do that now. With the object selected, I'll go to the export menu. I don't want to reset the origin. I think the origin is fine where the world center is now. I'll export 3D. I'll see that all modifiers will be applied. To continue working on this object in Blender, I should make a duplicate. Just to be safe, I'll make a duplicate and hide it. Export this object, okay. It's a very dense object, so I may need to wait a minute and hit Export PLY. And I can see that this object is now a point cloud. And if I press Alt-H, I can unhide the duplicate I made earlier. And if I open a 3D viewer like Supersplat, I'll drag the file in here. Looking at our edits, I can see that the sword and the body actually match really nicely. The skull resolution is a little too high compared to the body, so maybe I should have chosen a different object, or maybe I could have decimated the skull a little before merging it. And I can see as well that the reptile resolution and the body resolution is a little different. So maybe I should have done a better job painting, or maybe decimated a little also. But we can see that all of our edits, transforms, and color has been realized into a single model, just like working with a mesh.